Welcome to the Institute of Museum and Library Services webinar, IMLS Museum Grants for African American History and Culture, Fiscal Year 2023 Information Session. My name is Mark Isaacson, one of the program officers in the Office of Museum Services. And speaking on behalf of the rest of the staff, we're glad that you're interested in preparing an application for the IMLS Museum Grants for African American History and Culture program. I'll be referring to the program throughout the presentation as AAHC, which is the abbreviation of the program title that we use most often. In this webinar, I will cover the following topics: where to find information, the AAHC program overview, an IMLS and AAHC funding eligibility criteria, the goals of the program and the objectives of the goals, project funding levels, allowable and unallowable costs, application components, narrative review criteria, where to learn more, and we'll end with some tips and next steps. This is one of a series of webinars designed to help you find the information you need to create a competitive application for IMLS funding. Choosing a funding opportunity for FY2023 is available as a video and PDF on our website at the link shown here. In that webinar, we cover the IMLS vision, mission, and strategic plan. We address institutional eligibility for applicants, provide a quick overview of all of our funding opportunities, and show you how to find information online with a focus on our website. In addition to this webinar about the AAHC program, we're making available on-demand webinars for all of our grant programs available on our website. The IMLS website is an important place to find information. When you go to the website, you will see a drop-down menu for grants on our homepage. Click on the section titled Apply for a Grant, and this section of our website is designed for you. Each grant program has a landing page on the website. You'll find a brief overview of the grant program along with contact information for the IMLS staff assigned to the program. Our contact information includes a link that you can use to directly schedule on our calendar a 30-minute counseling call with the program staff person. Counseling calls are an important opportunity for you to discuss your project ideas, raise any questions you have about the application process. We encourage you to use this link to schedule a time to talk with one of us. We know that applying for a federal grant can be a complex and time-consuming process, and we want you to feel confident in moving forward with an application. Also on the grant program landing page, you'll find a link to the PDF of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. The Notice of Funding Opportunity, sometimes referred to as the NOFO, is the official instructions and guidance for how to prepare, complete, and submit an application for funding. The text and information I'm using in this webinar derive from the instructions and guidance found in the NOFO. And there's a NOFO available for each of the grant funding opportunities. Now let's discuss the Museum Grants for African American History and Culture grant program in more detail. Applications for the AAHC program should be aligned with the program goal and at least one of the associated objectives for that goal. So let's take a look at the goals for the grant program in more detail. The AAHC grant program was created by an act of Congress in 2003, the same act that created the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. The legislation that created the museum directed IMLS to create a grant program to improve operations, care of collections, and development and professional management at African American museums. And this program is now designed to strengthen institutional capacity in the African American museum community. The first awards for the AAHC program were made in 2006. And this map shows the range of awards from 2006 to our most recent set of awards in 2022. In that period of 17 years, we've funded 272 projects consisting of just under $30 million in funding. And we've had the opportunity to work with 226 peer reviewers. Here are the figures for the 3 most recent application cycles. In 2022, for example, we received 46 applications and made 33 awards for a total of about $3.9 million. The amount of funding available in this program and all IMLS grant programs is determined by the U.S. Congress through the annual federal appropriations process. And although Congress has yet to pass a final budget for the next fiscal year, 2023, which begins on October 1st, we anticipate that the funding for this program will either remain the same or potentially increase. Now let's take a quick look at eligibility. Funding eligibility criteria are detailed in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, but I'll briefly summarize here. All IMLS grant applicants must be either a unit of state, local, or tribal government, or be a private nonprofit organization. In addition, to be eligible for funding as a museum, an organization must also use a professional staff. That is, it employs at least one staff member or full-time equivalent, paid or unpaid, who's engaged in the acquisition, care, or exhibition to the public of objects owned or used by the institution. You also have to be organized on a permanent basis for essentially educational or aesthetic purposes, own or use tangible objects. So you can either be a collecting institution or a non-collecting institution, but you have to use those collections, care for those collections, those objects, exhibit those objects to the general public on a regular basis for at least 120 days a year. That's in the 12-month period prior to the application deadline, and conduct those activities in facilities that you own or operate. Museums, as defined here, may stand alone as independent organizations, nonprofit organizations responsible for the operation of a museum, or be administered by a governing body such as a college, university, or state or local government. Now, in addition to the general IMLS eligibility criteria, the AAHC grant program has specific criteria that's described in the NOFO. To be eligible for an award under this NOFO in FY2022, you must be a museum whose primary purpose, as reflected in its mission, is African American life, art, history, and culture. Or you could be a non-for-profit museum service organization or association whose primary purpose, as reflected in its mission, is to support African American museums. Or you could be one of the federally designated historically Black colleges and universities. HBCUs may be eligible to apply even if they do not have a museum. So back to the AAHC program goals. The first goal in this program is for projects designed to build the capacity of African American museums, which may involve increasing the number of museum professionals working at African American museums to enable the museum to expand educational programs, to engage with the community, to enhance professional management, or provide for improved care of collections. And some examples of these kinds of projects that you might apply for would be like exhibit development, exhibit design, exhibit fabrication, maybe a new interpretive and educational programs, about developing collections plans or interpretive plans or strategic plans using consultants or other professional expertise. Cataloging, inventorying, documenting collections, or even digitization of collections designed to enhance outreach or expand access or improve collections management. All of these things help to build the capacity of African American museums and help your museum better serve its community. The second goal of the grant program are for projects designed to support the growth and development of museum professionals at African American museums. This might involve developing and implementing internship programs or fellowship programs or mentoring programs to support emerging professionals entering the museum field. It could also involve developing more equitable and inclusive staff recruitment and retention programs. or creating new opportunities for staff to build skills. And some examples of the kinds of projects that you might apply for are maybe working with consultants and training providers to develop and offer workshops and training for museum staff, leadership, and volunteers, or creating and supporting paid internships and fellowships, including the support for recruitment, supervision, mentoring, and training for interns and fellows, and providing professional development and career growth opportunities for museum staff, leadership, and volunteers. These are some examples of the things that you might fund in this grant program. Now, once you've aligned your project with one of the goals in the program, you want to think about how much you might be needing to fund your project and the activities that you're thinking about seeking funding for. So our next topic has to do with how much funding your project requires. The size of your project and how much you are requesting in IMLS funds will determine the cost share requirement. And there are two options to consider. For small projects requesting an amount of federal funds less than $100,000, you do not need to provide a cost share. This option is designed for smaller scale projects that require less than $100,000 in funds from IMLS. For larger projects that are requesting an amount of federal funding greater than $100,001, and up to a maximum of $500,000, you must provide a one-to-one cost share. Cost share is the portion of the project costs that is not paid by IMLS funds. So common examples of cost share include the contributed property, services, in-kind contributions such as staff time or volunteer time, things that support project activities. Cost share must come from non-federal sources. It may not be funds from another federal agency. All expenses, including cost share, must be incurred during the project period. The most common cost share that we see in this grant program are folks that are demonstrating the contributed hours and time of current staff and volunteers towards the project activities, percentage of their time that's devoted to completing the project activities that you described in your narrative. Now let's turn to allowable and unallowable costs for your project. So as you think about the budget and the kinds of costs you're going to include, you want to be very careful in preparing your proposal and including only allowable costs in both the amount you ask for IMLS to pay for, as well as the amount of your cost share. We'll go through some common expenses that are allowable and unallowable, but you always want to check with the 2 CFR 200, which is our shorthand for the cost principles in the federal guidelines. And there's a link here to that list. These regulations are available online in a searchable format. But in the AAHC Notice of Funding Opportunity, we do provide a partial list of the most common examples of allowable costs. And these are pictured here. And these costs may be part of what you ask IMLS to pay for, or what you will pay for as part of your cost share if one is required. The rules about allowability apply equally to the entire budget. So in other words, whether a cost item is on the grant fund side of the budget or the cost share side of the budget, the same rules of allowability apply to all items in the budget. The biggest expense we often see in these budgets are for personnel, salaries, wages, and fringe benefits for staff involved in the project, right? So that is something you definitely want to include. Or travel costs, or materials or supplies, things that will help you complete the project that you've outlined. We also provide a list of generally unallowable costs, again, both for IMLS funds and for cost share. These costs may not be part of what you ask IMLS to pay for, nor can they be part of what you will pay for as part of your cost share. In fact, unallowable expenses can't show up anywhere in your proposal. For example, construction costs are not allowed, so do not include those in your budget. You are allowed to hire new staff to work on the project, but do not include costs for development office staff. As you'll see, that is one of the specific kinds of staff positions that we cannot pay for. Remember to focus your budget and the cost items you include there on expenses that will occur during the period of performance, during the period of the grant. And focus on expenses that are directly related to the activities in your proposed project. And as you prepare your application, it's a good idea to compare your list of proposed expenses against a list of allowable and unallowable costs. If after that you have specific questions, please contact us and we'll be happy to help. Now let's review the multiple parts of the grant application that you'll need to prepare. The application components are a series of documents that you will upload in grants.gov, and these together make up your application. The application components fall into three categories. The first is that of required documents. All applications must include these. Omission of even just one may result in the exclusion of your application from further consideration. The second group is that of conditionally required documents, and some applications must include these. It might depend on the nature of your institution or some aspect of your project. The third group are supporting documents, and these are completely optional. You may submit some or none. Now, the AAHC application will consist of a series of individual documents, and it's very important to make sure you prepare and submit everything necessary to complete your application. All applications must include the 11 required documents listed here. The 7 documents on the left side of the slide are created by you using a Word document and then saving this this document as a PDF. The instructions for required documents are found in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Many of these have page limits, and if you exceed the page limit specified in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, we must remove the extras before your application goes to review. So make sure your contents fit into the page limit specified and that that page number remains the same when you convert to a PDF. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see 4 documents listed: the application for federal assistance, the IMLS supplementary information form, the IMLS museum program information form, and the IMLS budget form. These are all forms that you will fill out either in grants.gov, not create individually. As I said, all the other required documents are created by you in a Word document, typically, and then uploaded and saved as PDFs in grants.gov. Recently, the government added a new requirement to all federal awards. Agencies are now required to measure the performance of awardees. The performance measure requirement is different from project evaluation, which is typically included in your project proposals. Performance measurement tells us how good a job you did as a federal awardee. It helps IMLS understand, manage, and improve our grant programs and the assistance we provide to applicants and awardees. So let's look at performance measurement and how we ask you to plan for it and report on it. In the Notice of Funding Opportunity, we provided a sample chart which applicants may use. And on the left side of the chart are 4 commonly used performance measures: effectiveness, the extent to which the activities contribute to achieving the results intended; efficiency, how well the resources are used; quality, how well the activities meet the requirements and expectations of the target group; and timeliness, the extent to which each activity is completed within the proposed timeframe. Across the top are the information points we are asking you to use in your statements, with examples of each. For instance, with data we will collect are listed counts such as costs or weights or percentages or in hours. And for each performance measure, we provide a couple examples of how to address issues that might turn up in museum projects. The blank space is where we suggest you write your own performance measure. We're looking for one statement for each measure. You may provide more than one if you wish. Just keep in mind that the performance measurement plan is limited to 2 pages. Now let's move from required documents and let's consider application components that are conditionally required. Some applications must include these. If you are applying as a nonprofit, then you must include your proof of nonprofit status. If you're using a federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, you must include a copy of the agreement. If you will create digital products during the course of your project, you must complete a digital product plan. And if you're requesting support for conservation treatment, you must include detailed condition reports or conservation treatment proposal. And just like the required documents, if you forget one of these, it might mean that your application is excluded. The third group of application components is supporting documents. These are completely optional. You should include only those things that supplement the narrative and support the activities described in the application. We recommend that you be respectful of your reviewer's time, so include what's important and helpful and stop there. Here are some examples of the kinds of supporting documents you may want to include in your application. These are some of the things that peer reviewers who will be reading your application will expect to see. These documents help support the case you're making in your application, that if it's funded, you can be successful in completing your project. So for example, if you're building capacity of your organization by adding new staff, you might consider including a position description for the new staff, or maybe an organizational chart or description of the leadership and supervisory structure of your organization, so we can see how the new position fits into existing staff. For projects that support the growth and development of museum staff or interns, you might also want to include position descriptions for the interns and what are the because then we can see what are the expected duties for these positions and the learning outcomes for the interns, right? You could include a recruitment plan, right? So if you're going to be reaching out to HBCUs to recruit interns, maybe a letter of support from an HBCU or another institution of higher education that you've already reached out to and that is interested in working with you to provide interns. Or even a needs assessment, sort of showing where are the training needs for your staff if you're going to be developing new training programs. Again, these are things that help reviewers see that you are ready to move forward with this project and that you're more likely to be successful in implementing the project if it's funded. When we look at care and access, improving care and increasing access to museum collections, there's some other kinds of documents you might want to consider including. So for example, a summary or scope of the scope and scale of museum collections, including some baseline information on the numbers of types and quantities of items held by the museum. Specific benchmarks on the quantity of collection items to be processed and cataloged, right? So we know the numbers of collection items you're dealing with, and you might not have room, for example, to put all that in your narrative. So putting it in a supporting document is a great alternative. You can also include a copy of a collections management policy if there or some other kind of supporting document that will help us understand how you manage the collection. Again, these are things that peer reviewers who will be reading your application will expect to see, and they do help support the case you're making in your application, that if funded, you can be successful in completing your project. Now, among the required components of your application, the narrative is the section that reviewers are likely to spend the most time reading. So let's look at the narrative in a little more detail. It's just 7 pages maximum, and it's divided into 3 sections: the project justification, the work plan, and the results. And the questions we ask you to answer and the review criteria by which your application will be judged are in the NOFO, right? And this is the first section, in the project justification part of the narrative. This is where you should lay out the reasoning for your project, why it's important. Tell us in the clearest terms possible what need, problem, or challenge you expect to address, who or what will benefit, and how your project will address the goals of the AAHC program. Target group refers to those who will be most immediately and positively affected by your project. And the fourth bullet there describes beneficiaries. That refers to those who are likely to be aided in the long term by your project. So they may or may not be the same as your target group. Now, reviewers also have a list of criteria, and they'll use this to evaluate your proposal and see how well you explained your project, how well you've identified the need, problem, or challenge you're going to address, how well you've supported that with relevant evidence, and whether you've clearly identified who or what will benefit from the project, and if this involves an audience of some kind, whether they've been involved in the plan. And because the need, problem, or challenge is foundational in your application, keep these points in mind that when you're describing the problem, remember that the federal government wants its investment to result in something that will get better. And as you define your need, problem, or challenge, articulate what will get better as a result of your project. Be as precise as possible. Will someone learn something, develop a skill? Will members of your community be better able to work together to solve a problem? Or will collections be better cared for? Will access to your collection and the information surrounding them be expanded? Identify what is important. Identify why it is important that this particular change happens, and gather any data to support your problem definition. Again, this is a key part of the project justification in your narrative. The next part of the narrative is the work plan. And this is where you're going to tell us who will do what, when, and using what resources. We will ask you to tell us what specific activities you will undertake, who will plan and implement and manage your project, when and in what sequence your activities will occur, what financial, personnel, and other resources you'll need to carry out the activities, how you will track progress toward achieving your intended results. Now, in this program, you must include $3,000 per year for travel to an IMLS designated meeting. You don't necessarily need to describe it in the work plan, but it is something you're going to want to include in the budget. And it is one of the expenses and activities that you'll want to build into your project. This expense is used to cover your participation in a convening of grantees at a place and location to be determined by IMLS. Now, when reviewers are looking at your work plan, they're going to evaluate your proposal on how well your activities are informed by appropriate theory and practice, and whether the goals, assumptions, and risks are clearly stated. Reviewers want to see that the team you put together has the experience and skills necessary to complete the work successfully, and whether your schedule is realistic and achievable. They'll also be looking at whether the time, personnel, and financial resources identified are appropriate for the scope and scale of the project. They'll consider if you've described a clear methodology for tracking your progress and adjusting course when necessary. So the work plan is built around the concept of activities. So it's important to be clear about what an activity is. An activity is something that someone does, and it has a beginning and an end, just like projects. And this is project-based funding. So you want to make sure that your activities that you're describing have a beginning and an end. And there should be a way that you know when you've finished it, because it doesn't need to be done anymore. The activity is completed. It's no longer on your to-do list. So remember, activity is not a goal or result or an outcome. It's just something you do as part of striving to achieve those goals or results. Again, aim for a reasonable level of detail here, not too much or too little. We want to have a sense that you know which activities and in what sequence you're going to undertake those activities in order to complete your project. The final section of the narrative is the results. And this is where you talk about the impact of your project. So what specific results do you intend to achieve? And again, to address that need, problem, or challenge you identified in the justification. You wanted to make something better, so tell us what that is going to look like. Tell us about any products that you're going to create and that will result from the project, and also what's going to happen after the end of the project. What's next? What reviewers are going to do is give us opinions on how well you designed a feasible plan for collecting and reporting data, and how likely the improvements that you propose will be realized. They'll want to know if the tangible products that you're going to create are going to be accessible to the target audience that you identified, and whether your plan for sustaining the benefits of the project is reasonable. So let's think of just one last slide here about results. So when we talked about results, we talked about a need, problem, or challenge that your project is addressing. And in this part of the narrative, you're going to answer that question: what will be better as a result of this work? Now, if you said someone's going to learn something, well, how will you know that they've learned it? So if your problem was related to improving the care of collections, well, how you'll be sure and how you measure that improvement? Like if you're digitizing to expand the accessibility of the collection, how will you know when you've done it, right? So all of your results should tie back to need, problem, or challenge and have something measurable. Some folks use a logic model. It's a useful tool to help explain your intended results and your plan for achieving them. If you are using a logic model, you can include that as a supporting document. And many reviewers will appreciate seeing that. It's not required, but if you're using a logic model as a tool to help you identify and articulate the results of your project, be sure to include it. So in summary, considering all the components of your application, there are 4 general characteristics of successful applications that reviewers will look for. So first is institutional impact. Your project should in some way build the capacity of your museum and or support the growth and development of museum professionals at your museum or HBCU. Again, this impact ties back to the goals or the purpose of this grant program: build capacity of museums and support the growth and development of museum professionals. So we want to see that impact. Second, your proposal really should have a good understanding of current practice and knowledge about the subject matter. What does that look like? So if you're developing a new program for schools and you're adapting one that you know is successful that another museum has used in another community, that's great. It's knowing what works and adapting it for your current location. You're going to be creating something brand new that's never been done before, that works too. But you want to make sure that you're aware of current practice in the museum world and using it to inform how you design the project. Third is the project-based design, right? So that again, we talked about sets of activities that have a beginning and an end. And so your work plan should be a logical set of interrelated activities that are tied to addressing the need or challenge. And fourth are the results, right? So we want to see that there's some sort of results at the end. An application that has all these characteristics, these 4 characteristics, will most often stand out in the review process and have the best chance of success for funding. And we want to share with you the places to look for more information, such as the IMLS website, where you can find the awarded grant search to learn about projects that we have funded through the AAHC program. This awarded grant search gives you an opportunity to explore our archive of grants that we have awarded in past years. And you can search by institution name, location, or keyword, and will give you basic information about the award and a brief description of the project. And this can be helpful as you put together ideas and you want to see what's been funded in the past. We also encourage you to reach out to those organizations that have received funding before. Give them a call and say, we saw you got an IMLS grant. Tell us how that worked for you. That's the kind of information sharing that can help you be successful in your application. We've also posted the narrative and schedule of completion for a cross-section of successful applications from 2022. And to find these examples, go to the sample applications page on the IMLS website and scroll down to the section for the AAHC examples. And you'll look at these proposals that might help you clarify your thinking about your own. Now, each PDF contains a copy of the 7-page narrative and also the schedule of completion. Again, this is designed to give you a sense of what a successful narrative looks like, what is good schedule of completion looks like. And these are ones that reviewers, when they were reading them, said, these are great reads. They're well written, gave us everything we needed to make a good assessment of this project. So, what happens after the application deadline? First, IMLS program staff review all applications for completeness and eligibility. The applications are sent out for external peer review. Reviewers then meet as a panel to discuss each application. Reviewer scores and written comments are provided directly back to all applicants to help you be more competitive in future cycles. Well, for those applications that were funded, we know that the reviewer comments can help you be more successful with implementation. Now, experienced and knowledgeable peer reviewers provide scores and comments based on the criteria outlined in the NOFO. IMLS staff look at budgets and financials and past performance that you may have if you've had any current or previous grants with IMLS. We then prepare materials for the IMLS deputy director and for the director. And by law, the director is charged with the authority and responsibility to make final award decisions, and this happens in May. In June, we notify all applicants by email of the award decisions and provide the scores and comments created by the reviewers. And on July 1st, 2023, funded projects begin. Now, at this point, we're going to just share a few tips collected from our experience working with applicants each year. First on the list is register early. You must have an active SAM.gov registration to register with grants.gov, and you must have a functional grants.gov registration to submit an application to IMLS. Now remember, there's no cost to register on these sites, but it can take from several days to several weeks to get your registration established and validated. So pay attention to this requirement, particularly if this is your first time applying for a federal grant, or if your SAM registration has expired, or if you've had a change in your point of contact for SAM. Start that registration process as early as possible. Your SAM.gov registration expires each year and you must renew it. You can log into SAM.gov at any time and find out your status. I would recommend doing that today. Both SAM.gov and grants.gov have their own help desks to assist you with resolving issues or tracking problems that might arise with your registration. Now, on our next to last slide, I wanted to show just a few tips from some of our accumulated knowledge over the years. First, read the application guidelines, the NOFOs. We know it's a long document, but it contains essential information on how to prepare your application. Schedule a counseling call with one of our staff. We are available to answer your questions, and these often come at the start of the process with some general questions, but you might also have questions later, a very specific or detailed question about a particular component, and you can email or call us with those questions too. Describe your museum well and vividly, and use recent and relevant data to make your point. See, reviewers are looking at the application to try to understand your museum, so be sure to give them a good description. Follow the narrative outline in the NOFO, and just even use the same headings to make it easy for reviewers to read and find the information they need. Avoid any acronyms or jargon. People who will review your application are experts, but they might not be totally familiar with your shorthand, so make it easy for them to understand what you mean. Ask a colleague to read the 7-page narrative with fresh eyes. So once you've drafted it, make sure someone else reads it. Ask them to act like a reviewer who's seeing it for the first time. Do this well in advance of the submission deadline so you have adequate time to edit the narrative if necessary, or maybe add more information if you need to do that. Be sure your application is complete. Check it against the table of application components and check it again to be sure you're not missing any required documents. And then submit to grants.gov early so you have time to deal with any glitches or last-minute issues that might come up. So let's recap. Make sure you go to imls.gov and read the NOFO. Check your organization's registration for both SAM.gov and grants.gov. Connect with us. Talk with a program staff person. Prepare your application. Make sure it's complete. And finally, submit before the deadline. November 15th, 2022, 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Eastern Time. Now, in closing, I just want to make sure that you have our email address and direct phone number. And don't hesitate to call or email either of us with questions or concerns. Thank you, and have a great day.